Hi, I'm Andy Orem. I'm at the Open Source Convention today, and I'm talking with David McCann about international development and how open source fits in. David, tell us a bit about what you're doing with the United Nations. This United Nations Foundation might be something people don't know about, and how open source fits in there.
Sure. Yeah, so I'll give you a brief kind of background that is the extent of my knowledge on the UNF and how they came to be. Essentially, it's an endowment that was given to the United Nations by Ted Turner during a time when it was the Ronald Reagan administration, and there was a chance that the United States was not going to be paying their UN dues. So as a private citizen, he said, I would like a mechanism to give this money to the UN, and they weren't set up to do that at the time. So he had to actually create this organization just as a mechanism to get the money to them. Since that time, this was obviously many years ago, they've kind of grown and taken on a bunch of different development focused programs. One of which that I'm working for currently is the Digital Impact Alliance, and so we're focused on as you said, kind of at least my work specifically is around trying to figure out how to leverage open source and create more sustainable open source projects and communities that are servicing the international development and kind of humanitarian sectors.
And I guess there's the usual humanitarian arguments or arguments for freedom when you choose open source instead of just contracting out to somebody.
I think that's right, and I think that there are lots of opportunities for creating sort of perverse market incentives when you're talking about a donor-based marketplace. And I think that we still see some of that today. And a lot of the challenges that we're trying to solve now are based around the fact that open source became kind of a mandate or a box to tick when you were applying for grants to some of these larger donors. If you're doing software development work, it must be open source. What that leads to, when there's a bit of a misunderstanding about what it actually means to do open source right, is a bunch of code that's on GitHub with very high barriers to entry in terms of comprehension and contribution. And usually a lot of products that are kind of housed in a single organization that's doing all the work, providing all the resource, and reaping any of the benefits of that product.
It sounds like you've encountered and you can anticipate when there are going to be these sort of barriers, like things that were done internally and aren't really open, and you find ways to make sure they're really open then.
Yeah, I'd say that our approach so far has been sort of two-pronged. So one is taking the existing products that we've kind of identified as being best of breed, or at least widely used in the sector, and trying to raise the bar in terms of the maturity of those products. Because the funding cycles are often tied to particular programmatic goals, there's a very clear start and end, and there's usually not a lot of easy mechanisms for maintenance tasks, refactoring work, and long-term sustainability of these projects. So just getting the maturity level up to a point where people can actually pick them up and start to contribute to them more easily is kind of one of our focuses. And then the other one would be then finding and building these multi-stakeholder communities that can then take those mature products and carry them forward for as long as they're useful and kind of doing all that maintenance and sustainability work.
So it's probably time to get sort of concrete and
Sure.
Tell me some of these projects and who's using them.
Yeah, so I mean, I think the first two that we really partnered with that I can go into a little bit are ODK, the Open Data Kit. So that was a project that was developed out of the University of Washington and is very much appropriate for this sector. So it's about replacing paper-based forms in the field where there's low connectivity or no connectivity with a smartphone app that can kind of collect the data in a form that you can design and push down to the handset, and then will store and forward those form submissions when you get back to a place with regular connectivity. So that's one. And then another big one that we've been working with is called Bomni, which is actually a suite of tools built around OpenMRS, which is an open source medical record system software, and a number of other products, and trying to make kind of a fully packaged suite of mHealth tools that, say, a Ministry of Health or some other country or large organization could roll out and be kind of an end-to-end solution.
I know a lot of places are using OpenMRS and some other related software. So are the things you're talking about things that are already deployed, being used on a daily basis?
Yeah, that's right. And I would say, with ODK and Bomni in particular, and that's why I kind of chose them, is, not only are these two products fairly widely used, but around them, because of their rather permissive licenses, is a whole ecosystem of service providers and offshoot products as well. So these are both very kind of vibrant communities that have the potential to to really kind of go the distance in this space.
Do you find that in the target regions you're working in, there are people who have the skills to adapt the tools to their needs?
I think that that's still a big challenge, and I would even go so far as to say that a lot of the time with these kind of single-housed products, it's hard to find people anywhere that can contribute to them other than within that one organization or the one kind of consulting company that they work with. And so that's a lot of what we're trying to do is, they've at least ticked the box. They are open source, so ostensibly pull requests are welcome, and we're going to start making a lot of pull requests.
Do you think that people higher up in the United Nations Foundation can understand these practices of the community and appreciate what you're doing?
I think that understanding what it means to be open source is still a point of debate in development in particular, and I think that, the farther up you go, the more abstract and maybe difficult it becomes to kind of convey the ideas of the vision of what, what we have for what these products could be and should be. But I think that we're getting there. So one of the really promising things that I've seen as a trend in the sector is something called the Principles for Digital Development, which for engineers, if you hear them, they sound a lot like just use good software engineering techniques when designing your tools or your solutions. But I think it's really become pervasive in the field amongst practitioners of all different backgrounds now. And one of those principles is, use open source where possible, use open data, use open standards, APIs. Where possible, where privacy isn't an issue, default towards open when you can.
So I'll end by asking you, when people are looking at this video, wherever they are in the world, whatever their skill level, what would you like for your organization? What can people do?
I guess first and foremost, we're giving away money. So I think the most helpful thing people could do would be to apply. We have some kind of systems level changes that we'd like to see and kind of curating this ecosystem. So if you have an open source project that could use funds for things that are maybe not the most new and shiny, come reach out to us. But in general, I think for the open source community at large, I would say, try and find a humanitarian or development project. If you're looking for something new to contribute to, you can really make a difference. And I think that's part of the gratification of working in open source in general. But I think this sector is especially, impactful in that way.
And it sounds like where there are existing tools, it can also be useful to localize them, to maybe train people to use them.
Absolutely, yeah. Contribution does not equal code, certainly. Documentation, being able to answer questions, localization, as you said, these are all things that we have a vast need for.
Oh, it's nice to talk to someone who is offering to give away money instead of asking for money, but you also have some traditional asks that people can give of themselves to help. Well, thank you very much for coming today.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.